Hey all, this is the first in a series of video tutorials showing networking in Python. These videos will cover UDP and the TCP protocols, and server-to-client and peer-to-peer architecture, as well as a little bit on transferring files over a network connection, and HTTP and IRC protocols, and how they can be implemented in Python. We're going to start off with UDP because it is a fairly simple protocol and it doesn't require a connection. It doesn't have quite so many error corrections. Well, it doesn't have any error correction actually, but it's a very simple protocol, and you can sort of think of it as a stream of data. So the first example we're going to work on is a client-server system, and we're going to have the server repeatedly send a string, and we're going to then build a client that will receive the string and display it on the screen. So we're going to start by creating a new Python file, and we'll just give it the name server.py. We're going to be using the socket library for Python for all of the following videos, as well as some others, but I'll let you know as we go. So we'll start by importing the socket module. Import socket, it's easy as that. So in order to do UDP networking, we need to first work out what we're going to do. And in this case, we're going to be sending a string to the client. So we need to know the address of the client. In this case, we'll call it host, and the address will be localhost. You could also use your machine's LAN network address or the loopback address, which would probably be 127.0.0.1. In fact, if you were directly connected to the internet, you could also use your internet IP address. We also need to decide on the port to send this data on. Now, you can really select any port, so long as you use it for both the client and the server, of course, and it's below 65,000. Also, you preferably want to select a port over 1024. Those lower ports are used for things like HTTP, SSH, Telnet, FTP, all kinds of different services, and depending on your operating system, you may not be able to get down there. So in this, for this example, I'm going to use 5454 as my port, just something simple I can remember. We're also going to need to create some data to send, so I'll just create a variable called data and just some text. That'll do. That's just a short string we're going to send over the network, but feel free to send anything you like. In fact, you can send anything you can turn into a string, or you can send anything, really. And we'll go into that more later on. In order to send information over a network, we need to use sockets, hence the library. So in order to do that, we need to first create a socket. So for this example, we'll create a socket and we'll call it S. To create a socket, you simply go socket.socket. We're now creating a new socket from the socket library. We need to first select the IP address system we're going to be using for our socket, and in this case we're going to be using IPv4, so we simply select that from the socket library, and you do so by just going socket.af_inet. You then also need to select the protocol we're going to use, and in this case we're going to use the UDP, well, UD protocol I suppose, which is also the user datagram protocol. So we go socket.sock_dgram for datagram. And that's it. We just close that off, and we've now created our socket we're going to use. Sending data is very easy using UDP. We simply select the socket we've just created, and we type in send to. We then give it the data we want to send, and then in a tuple we give it the host and the port we want to send it on. And the port. There we go. And just close that off. That will send just some text, which is the string we created earlier, and send it to localhost, which is this machine on port 5454. Now, in order to be able to receive this data and have a little more leeway when we're trying to receive it, we'll just stick this in a while loop. This will allow us to, it will repeatedly send and allow us to have some time to actually receive the data. The problem with this is that while loop is going to loop very, very quickly, and we'll get a lot of data spat out onto our network. And while we are just using the loopback interface on our computer at the moment, if you were using your network to send this data, you'd essentially cause a denial of service attack, putting out as much bandwidth as you can onto the network. So we're just going to import the time module, and from that we'll just use the sleep command, the sleep function, and just make it sleep for 1 second, and that means it will send data every 1 second. So we'll just save that now, and we can run that, although we probably should put a print statement in so we can tell that it's sending. So that's easy enough to do. So now it will just say sent and the data we've sent, and we can just run that, and there we go. So our program is now sending that data across the network. What we need to do now is create a client that is capable of receiving this data. So what we'll do is we'll start another project called client. The cool thing about this is creating a server and a client in UDP is very simple. The socket module behaves similar for both receiving and sending. So we start off just the same as we did before. We import the socket library. We need to create the host. In this case, it's the host we're wanting to receive from, so we'll just call it localhost. Also the port we wanted, which was 5454. And we need to create a socket, which we do in the same way. We simply assign it a name. Of course, it doesn't need to be the same S, but we'll use it for simplicity. Socket.socket. Then we select the AF_net. Sorry, AF_inet. And then we need to select the protocol we want. And we've created our socket as we did before. Now, in order to tell our socket to listen on a particular port for a particular host, we need to use the bind function. And to do that, we simply go s.bind. So we've just said our socket, and we're going to bind it to a particular host and a particular port. And in order to do that, we just hand it a tuple with our host and the port we want it to listen on. And that's it. And to receive data, we simply select our socket and we go RECV, for short for receive, and that will receive data. We also need to say how much data we want it to receive, and so any number would really work, but we know our string is roughly 15 characters long, so it needs to be greater than that. So we'll say 30 bytes or characters in this case. And we want it to print out what it receives, so that's pretty easy to do. And we might as well have it repeatedly doing this, so we'll stick this in a while loop as well. Now, all going well, running this should receive the string that our other client, our server, is currently running. Yes, it's still running, hasn't crashed, that's great. Alright, so we'll go to our client, run that, and then we can see our data being received by our client on the right from our server on the left. That's an introduction to UDP in Python. Next time I'll show you a little bit of TCP, And then we'll get on to doing some more complicated things like actually sending some useful data rather than just a little text, constructing some packets so we can easily work out where a packet starts and finishes, and start looking at the applications of this technology. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask. Otherwise, happy coding, and thanks for watching.